We're going to talk today. We'll start with some introduction. We'll go over the basics of compression, and we will revisit the original crime attack. And then we move on to our new contribution to this attack, is expanding crime in the sense that increasing the attack surface with changing the target of this attack to HTTP response, and later on introducing the time attack, which shift the target from measuring payload size to measuring payload send time, which in turn eliminates the need for the attacker to be an eavesdropper, which in turn then relaxes the requirement for the crime attack. And we will conclude with some suggested mitigation against this attack. So let's start with talking about compression over the web, and this is the state it has been prior to a crime attack. And compression over the web is based on the gzip algorithm, and the common compression is the compression of the HTTP response body. And this is most of us, when we think about HTTP compression, it's really the HTTP response body compression. And there are some more uncommon compression that use the gzip algorithm too, compressing the HTTP request body for file upload, for example, and some header compression in the case of the SSL compression, which compress the whole channel, including the headers and all other parts of the message, and also SPDY, which compresses the HTTP request header too. And so gzip is really comprised of the LZ algorithm that was developed in Israel by Lempel Ziv in the late 70s. It compresses repeating strings in a lossless, asymptotically optimal way with no overhead, no extra dictionaries. So therefore, it's a good candidate for web compression. And how does it work? Well, let's take the first verses of Genesis, and instead of coding repeating strings explicitly, we can use a pointer, a back reference. So in the beginning, God created, so we already had a blank and then THE and then space again. So we don't need to explicitly code it. We can just give a back reference, go back 25 steps, and copy 5 characters from that point, and so forth. And we can see that a lot of human-generated text are extremely the redundancy within it of repeating strings is very big, and therefore the compression is very valuable. And let's go over to the relationship between compression and encryption. So if I want to both compress my data so it would take less space, and also encrypt it because I want to keep it secret, so I can first compress and then encrypt, or I can encrypt and then compress. So I can do both things, but which is the more logical thing to do? Well, of course, you should first compress your data and then encrypt it, because encryption removes any sense of redundancy from the original plaintext. So if you are encrypting and then compressing, and the compression is actually compressing something, then it probably means that your encryption algorithm is not so good. So in order to efficiently compress, the compression must be applied on the plaintext and not on the ciphertext. And this is exactly the fact that the original crime used. And about a year ago, Rizzo and Wang, I hope I pronounced it correctly, introduced the compression ratio infoleak made easy crime attack, which is a chosen plaintext attack model, and we will discuss what does it mean. And it targets compression information leakage. So let's first understand the attack model. As always, we have Alice and Bob that communicating securely through encryption between one another, and we have Eve, the eavesdropper. So the eavesdropper, the attacker has capability not only to eavesdrop, but also to choose arbitrary plaintext to be encrypted and obtain the corresponding ciphertext. So Eve can tell Alice to tell Bob something and watch it get sent over the wire, the encrypted form of Eve's chosen text. And in a slide, and we will go into details of it, but let's get a first impression of the crime attack. So the attacker in this case is sending some plaintext for the victim. So the victim now compresses and encrypts it. And the attacker is also able to measure the data size since the attacker is an eavesdropper. So, and let's remember that compression, LZ compression, compresses repeating string. So what the attacker tries to do is try to guess the secret data within Alice sent data, and if the guess is correct, then this is a repeating string, and the repeating string gets compressed, and the result will be shorter payload compared to incorrect guesses. And using that method, the attacker can discover the secret in a character-by-character fashion. Or more formally, if we put it into an algorithm, the attacker starts with some initial guess, which is a known prefix of the secret string, and tries to append a symbol from the alphabet, and compares the results, and it takes the shortest payload. It observes it gets sent over the wire, compressed and encrypted, and then it distinguishes a good guess by because it's the shortest payload, has the shortest payload length, and now the attacker can add another symbol to this guess and go on to discover the whole secret by appending a character by character time after time. So how does this theoretical model fit into HTTP reality and as we see it on the web? So the attacker is an eavesdropper. He sees ciphertext, and attacker creates HTTP request interactively via JavaScript. So as an attacker, the attacker has full control over the URL and can predict the headers, but does not control or sees the cookies, because the attacker don't see it on the wire because it's the transport is encrypted, and it cannot recover it directly from a script because due to the same origin policy, which does not allow scripts from one side to access data from another side. So the attacker doesn't have the ability to directly discover the secret cookie. But using that crime attack, the attacker can guess, let's say, in this case, the secret cookie name is session ID equals something. So the attacker starts with session ID equals A and measure the size of this payload. And after a few tries, it tries session ID equals D. And since this is a correct guess, so this payload will be better compressed and therefore will result shorter payload over the wire, and the attacker can observe that and say, okay, I know this is the correct guess. Now I'm moving on and I'll try to guess the next character, and that way it goes on and on until it discovers the whole secret cookie. And so that's basically what we said in this slide. So there are some practical issues with the crime attack, but it mostly works. And what was the aftermath of the crime attack? SPDY implementation canceled or modified header compression, and so cookies are not being compressed with the URL, so the attacker cannot create guesses from the URL she controls on the cookie she cannot see. And also Chrome, which was the only browser that supported SSL compression, had disabled the SSL compression. So the result is that crime attack is no longer relevant since there is no attack surface. There is nothing that compresses HTTP request headers and cookies. So we are on a mission to resurrect the crime attack, and we do so by extending the crime for HTTP responses. This is where our new contributions begin. And so let's break down crime to its basic elements and ingredients, and we see what we have to modify and come up with in order to transfer the attack target from being on the HTTP request to the HTTP response. So you need the data to be encrypted, to be compressed. You need a secret element. The secret element should have some kind of prefix or suffix, so you will be able to start with some initial guess. And you need to control some part of the message, so the attacker can put her message within the payload and get it compressed together and then see the results. So encryption and compression remains the same, SSL and gzip on both request and response, so nothing to do there. We're changing the secret element location from the request header and the cookie header to response body, but then the problems show up because when crime was applied to request, the secret element was the cookie value, and we had the prefix of cookie name. But when we go to HTTP response, this secret data and its prefix is application specific. And also, what seems to be even a harder problem, that chosen plaintext location. It's very obvious when you have on HTTP request, the attacker controls the URL. But what does the attacker controls when it tries to find something on the HTTP response? It comes from the server, not from the client. So let's tackle these problems. First, secrets in response data. So we need a secret with a known prefix or suffix, but luckily they are everywhere because application secrets are in the content. That's the reason why they are applications are under the SSL and encryption. So everything secret, all your secret data is transferred under SSL. With your bank account, whatever is over SSL. So there are a lot of secrets on HTTP response, and secrets are often structured, so they have a fixed prefix or suffix, as this example shows. So it would say phone number, and then it will be followed by your phone number, or your bank balance is, and then your bank balance. So although this is application specific, it's not uncommon, and you will find structured secrets everywhere. So let's move on. So we dealt with the secret element and the secret element prefix suffix, so we are left with the chosen plaintext location. So again, this solution is application specific, and again, it's not infrequent because many application embeds user input as expressed with HTTP parameters within the response. And in fact, many times these parameters will be embedded even if there were no parameters on the original request, as this example from Twitter shows that originally this URL had no parameters at all, but I had added a question mark and then x equals my string, and x equals my string got embedded within the response. So the attacker have opportunities to embed her user-controlled data within the response. So let's sum up. We came up with all the ingredients for a crime attack. And let's demonstrate it using a proof of concept that we had created on Google Scholar site. Google Scholar is a search engine for academic citations. You can input the author name and get all of his articles and papers. So in this case, we see the blue box. We can see that the attacker can control by using the HTTP parameter. In this case, guess@gmail.com. It gets embedded within the response as we see that the blue box that denotes the guess@gmail.com at the response, and we are trying to find the victim's username within Gmail, which is in this case Honey Mad Hatter, which is some account we created over Gmail. And we have implemented this proof of concept with Python that actually just discovered the username just by observing the length. So we start with our initial guess, and we can see that our algorithm is able to recover the secret, which is again the username at Gmail, character by character. We see that sometimes the algorithm iterates throughout all the alphabet, and sometimes it is able to find it pretty quick because we added some heuristics that says that if the size of, if we add one more character and yet the size remained the same, then it means that this is the correct guess because this will be the shortest guess. So sometimes the algorithm does not need to try all the alphabet, just a few characters in order to determine which is the correct characters, and we're pretty much at the end. And at the end, the algorithm will try the alphabet and we'll see that, well, it cannot determine which is the best guess because they are all the same, and therefore the algorithm will know that it was finished and we had reached the final. I should have picked up maybe a shorter username, but we're already at the end. Yeah. So in the end, it was shown that almost all characters yields the same payload size, and therefore this is the end of the secret data, since all guesses are the same, yield the same result. So we have extended and resurrected the crime attack, and now it can, instead of attacking the requests where the attack surface is no longer exists, it attacks the responses. And let's move on to our time attack, which I think is even more important than the extended crime. So what is the motivation for time attack? Crime attack model had some very limiting attack precondition. The attacker needs to be both eavesdropper and also control the web page the victim visits. While directing user traffic to a control website is a fairly easy task. You can use a phishing email or with advertising or all other schemes. But eavesdropping to the victim's traffic with some secured site is not an easy task and usually requires some physical proximity between the attacker and the victim. And of course, whenever physical proximity is needed, it really makes the attack much less practical. So if only we could drop the eavesdropping requirement, then it would make crime a practical attack. And therefore, we introduced the time attack, which is timing info leak made easy. Again, the attack model is the chosen plaintext attack model, and we are targeting timing information leakage instead of size information leakage. And this is quite a complex argument, so we're breaking it down to 3 claims. So the first claim is that HTTP payload size may carry sensitive information, and more specifically, you don't need to know the absolute value of the site. You just need to observe, to distinguish, to be able to distinguish between differences in sizes. And well, we will show that. And afterwards, we will see that using timing measurement, attacker can distinguish that HTTP payload size differences. So you do not need to explicitly and directly measure the traffic size. You can just measure the timing of the attack. And finally, we will show that all of this can be done using a JavaScript. So if we combine all of these claims together, the result will be that attackers can learn the user-sensitive information using JavaScript from their site with no eavesdropping, which of course will make this attack much more practical. So our new attack model we don't need any eavesdropping. We just need Eve to be able to tell Alice what to transmit to Bob, and that's it. And the rest will be taken care of with JavaScript on Alice on the website that Alice visits. So let's visit our first claim, that there is sensitive information in HTTP payload site. Well, we had shown already with the original crime that that the size information carries some sensitive data for HTTP requests. We had shown with the extended crime that again size information can leak data and contains some sensitive data. But we can also think of much simpler and not crime-related examples of information in size, found in size. For example, let's say your bank balance is not being compressed, and you know that if you have 4 figures in your bank balance, then it's the response size is 100 bytes, and if you have 5, then it's 101, and so on. So again, even if it's not, and it's not related at all to crime, the size information contains some valuable information. And we can see, I'm sure we can all think of all other scenarios where the size information leaks data. And moreover, we can see in all of these examples, we don't really need to know what is the exact size value, the absolute size value. We just need to be able to observe the difference. Such in crime, we don't care what is the absolute size of the payload over the network. We just want to get the shortest one. So we need to distinguish between shorter and longer, but we don't need to explicitly have the absolute value. And same goes for the bank balance figure example that we had mentioned earlier. So we had concluded that size information leaks data, and moreover, the size diff information, size difference information leaks data. Let's move on and say we claim that timing reveals payload size differences. And it should be very intuitive that page size is highly correlated with the time it takes it to be transmitted over the network. And in fact, the first advice and the first tip in any performance HTTP for performance guide is make your web page smaller by, for example, compressing them or removing unnecessary elements. So making the web faster, minimize payload size. So size and timing are highly correlated. And Google Web Page Speed Tips for Developers says that the amount of data sent in each server response can add significant latency to your application. And in addition to the network cost of the actual byte transmitted, there is also a penalty incurred for crossing an IP packet boundary. And let's talk about this IP packet boundary. So the client usually sends a window of packet, and this is true for both client and server, and then waits a round-trip time for acknowledgement. It's a round-trip time because the client packet has to arrive to the server, and then the server sends the acknowledgement, so it takes round-trip time for the acknowledge to arrive to the client. And RTT time, round-trip time, is very noticeable. So using that boundary effect, the attacker can easily distinguish between the cases where the size of the payload is less or equal than this window, or to the cases where the size of this payload is bigger than that window. And if the payload length is exactly on the data boundary, the attacker can determine 1 byte differences, because it's even if the payload overflows just by 1 byte, then all of a sudden there is a big fine over this overflow, because it will take 1 more round trip time for it to be sent. So the attacker has the ability to distinguish between 1 byte differences. And remember that our attacker has the ability to add as many characters as he would like. So the attacker is fully able to to create the case where the client is sent, or the server, depends on what is attacking, that will be exactly on that boundary. So any change of 1 extra byte will be very noticeable. And let's see it in the wild. And first, request timing. So we sent a request with the Chrome browser, and the Chrome browser sent 2 packets and then wait. And if it needs to send 3 packets, even if it's 1 more byte, then you pay 1 extra round trip time. 1 extra round trip time. In the red box, we can see that the round trip time is 170 milliseconds. So it's quite a long time with respect to the whole request, very noticeable. And the same effect also exists for the responses. The Apache server implements a window of 3 packets. If it needs to send the 4th, it pays 1 extra round trip time, and we can see this payment of round trip time happening every 4th request, every 4th packet of the request. So we had seen that using timing measurements, we can recover size differences. Now we only need to show that it can be done with the JavaScript. So how do we do it with the JavaScript? Well, we can do it for HTTP request timing by creating HTTP requests with the XHR directive, the XML HTTP request directive. And in fact, in this case, the same origin policy will kill the response, but that's very good for us, because we are only interested in the request, and that way we can measure just the request time, and we use get time on that XHR event, and in order to measure time. And this is an important part. We eliminate the noise, because originally we thought that the different delays and jitter over the network will sabotage with our timing measurements. But if we do it a couple of times and take the minimal value, or we could have averaged down this this random delay and get the original results. And we can see here our results of measuring time, measuring request time with JavaScript. And On the left-hand side, we can see the results from the internal debugger of Chrome. And on the right-hand side, we can see the result as created with our JavaScript. And we can see that timing can be correctly recovered. Thank you, Alex, for that. And so, just a sec. So timing can be correctly captured. As we can see, the results from the JavaScript are very similar to the results that coming out from the Chrome debugger, and the results are conclusive. I didn't include in the screenshot all of the results, but we can see that for the shorter, in this case, we had sent alternately messages with 1 byte difference, and that was just across that window, that boundary, and we can see that the results are very, very conclusive, as the difference between the bigger and the smaller one almost twice as much. It takes almost twice as much time, so the differences are very noticeable. And we've done the same. This was a proof of concept with JavaScript for the request. We've done the same with the JavaScript for the response. In this case, we used iframe and changed the source of the iframe with the JavaScript. It works fine, but there is some problem. If the site uses the xframe option headers, it can block us from containing iframe from the site in our attacker site. So we came up with image source, and for image source is not tamed by the xframe option header, and the result flows in. And again, we use the get time on the image event and recover the original timing. So let's conclude that phase and revisit our claims. So we had shown that HTTP payload size may carry sensitive information, and more specifically, timing differences carry that sensitive information. I'm sorry, size differences carries the same that sensitive information. Using the timing measurement, the attacker can distinguish the HTTP payload size differences, and this timing measurement can be taken from a JavaScript from the attacker side. So the result is the attacker can learn to use the sensitive information using JavaScript from their side with no eavesdropping, which makes the crime attack very practical, since the attacker no longer needs to be an eavesdropper. So we might ask ourselves, where was the same origin policy in this case? Because same origin policy was meant to prevent malicious scripts served from one site to leak data to other site. This is exactly the purpose of same origin policy. And here, using a script, we were able to deduce the secret information on other secret site from our site. So there is some problem with the same origin policy. And so I think there is a greater lesson in here for us, a general lesson, that automation introduces new risks, because simple multimedia tags are exempt from same origin policy. You can include within your HTML page images from other domains and other sites. It's acceptable. And so it seems that enabling image source manipulation by JavaScript, it wouldn't change too much. So because the the programmer could have manually create references and fetch images from other side. So when I enable JavaScript to do so, I'm not changing anything. Nothing had changed. However, something had changed because now it can be done automatically. And the URL can be set interactively, and you can measure the load time. So although enabling JavaScript to edit and manipulate the source did not add any new functional feature, the ability to do so automatically introduces new risk. And we have to consider it each time we are doing something that was previously manually and we turn it to be automatic, we introduce new risks that we are not necessarily aware of. Just in this case, you know, who would have thought that allowing to manipulate an image URL will leak some secret data which is not in images by using all kind of features of compression and JavaScript timing and so forth. So let's wrap it up and with some mitigation. What we have shown is we had resurrected the CRIME attack with extended CRIME attack against responses. We introduced the time attack to launch size diff attacks with no eavesdropping requirement. The original crime, the extended crime. There's one that I haven't discussed, but since we have time, let's discuss it. This login detection using timing information. Let's start with size information. You can detect whether a user is logged into some other service by sending, again with the JavaScript, some request to that service. And in many cases, if the user is logged into this service, then he would actually do something, and it takes more time. And when it's not connected and not authenticated to that service, it will get some kind of "you are not authenticated" a message right away. So again, you can use another example of size and timing information leak. And again, application specific, such as the example of number of digits in your bank balance. Before we go to discuss the mitigation, let's say what wouldn't work. So, as the Lucky 13 authors write, and Lucky 13 is another recently published attack against SSL using timing. It says a natural reaction to timing-based attacks is to add random time delay to frustrate statistical analysis. In fact, this countermeasure is surprisingly ineffective. And the reason is really obvious, that since this extra delay, extra random time delay is random, we can use statistical analysis and create number of requests and average down this random delay, or take the minimal value as we had done in order to eliminate this random time delay. So this wouldn't work. So what would work? So we recommend that browsers should support and respect the X-frame options, a header for all content inclusion, not just iframe. And when you think of it, it's very logical. It will allow application to take control over the presentation of their content on other domain. The same way you don't want your original content to be framed in another site, this is the same way you don't want your images to be displayed by some other site. Maybe you do and you want to explicitly allow it, or the other way around, you want to explicitly prohibit sites from including your images. Right now, there is no HTTP directive that allows you to do so. And by including by applying the X-frame options for images, or other equivalent header, X image options if you like, for images, then the original application can control the presentation of its original content on other sites. And what application can do? First, applications should take control over their content. They should implement CSEF protection, so they will govern the way that their content is being accessed. So they will know it's the user had wanted to get there and not just send there with another application. And use the X-frame option header as we had discussed. Another good advice is beware of unknown parameters. If you remember the Twitter example that we had shown, that by just pushing some unknown parameter that was not part of the application, we were able to control some parts of the response content. And this could have been mitigated if the application had some way to block or be alerted on the existence of unknown parameters and not just embedded into the response. And finally, deploy anti-automation measures, such as the case when we tried our proof of concept against Google. Sometimes Google got angry of us and said, "Oh, you're trying too many times. Please solve a CAPTCHA for me to prove that you are human." So the thresholds were not as so tight because we were able to really deploy this attack against Google Scholar. But if it had been correctly tuned, then it would have been a proper mitigation against this kind of attacks. With that, I conclude. If there are any questions.
Actually, I was thinking the other way around, because I mean, cross-site request forgery tokens are typically embedded in the response page as a hidden field. So that would be something that I could guess then as an attacker.
Yeah.
So I don't have that, right?
Yeah. So CSEF token seems like a logical target for this attack, and also this allows to get rid of that application specific, because it's related to many frameworks, and we can have something more general than application specific. So very good remark.
The timing measurements you gave for measuring the time in JavaScript, which cycle were you using for SSL? Is that flow-based or SSL?
No, this was not over SSL. It just was to prove that timing over the network can be captured. And having said that, of course, it would have been better, to do the whole thing. But as we had seen, the timing attack is not necessarily related to SSL. In this case, if we drop the eavesdropper requirement, then it makes sense that this way the attacker can guess something it cannot see because it's on third site, and it cannot see it also on the network because it's not an eavesdropper. So even if it doesn't work for SSL, and I guess it would work for SSL because size is remained over the SSL. Of course, there might be some practical issues and overhead and so forth, and you might need a lot of more requests in order to get some noises out of the system. But even if it doesn't work on the SSL, there's a lot of cases where timing contains valuable information on non-SSL cases. Okay, thank you very much.